Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here, and I am back as always with another lore episode. This time joined by not only our illustrious co-host in Ashterothi, but also another co-pilot amongst the stars and aficionado of Evil Online lore, and that's Uriel.
Hello, how you doing?
Greetings, fellow Empyreans.
And of course we have Old Faithful of Eve Fountains of Knowledge, Ashterothi. And today we're going to be talking about the Triglavians. So, there's a hell of a lot to cover here, and not all of it has really been revealed to us as of yet. So, what I want to do is I want to just start this off by talking about what we know for absolute certain, or at least that we can very heavily infer from other areas of lore.
Yeah, okay. There are a few things we could start with that. I mean, if you just want to jump in and say, the Triglavian Collective is a civilization that lives in this place called the Abyss, which we don't know everything about, but it's, turbulent and hostile, but that's where they live. As far as we can infer, it seems they had to escape there for some, old reason, and we don't know the whole story behind that at this time, but you know, they're there. So their civilization is split into three different clades. Basically, think of them as really big tribes, sort of with little sub tribes under them. Those are going to be the subclades. All of these different groups, they have infighting, they have conflict. They're all really independent. But the core of that is when they're threatened by an outside force, they can all put aside their differences and generally work together pretty well. And that's what's been happening ever since the Drifters and the Rogue Drones and Sancha and us all showed up in the Abyss. So that's what they're at right now. And
Yeah,
yeah, just just the way their civilization is organized.
and this is probably going to become a theme in this discussion. Often, when we're trying to understand the Triglavians, the words that they use have real life meaning, and so by unpacking those words, often gives us some sort of clue as to what's going on. In this case, a clade is a group of organisms that have evolved from a common ancestor. According to the principles of cladistics. So what that means is that, like, basically the idea goes is that all of the Triglavians would have come from a single source, and then they've basically branched into three subgroups, and then those subgroups are branched into further subgroups, the subclades.
Yeah, precisely.
And this is a big thing about the Triglavians in general. They are very I like to say that they're evolution incarnate. They're very interested in proving. They fight even among themselves, and they're constantly looking for the best way to do things in a very evolutionary kind of way.
Yeah, just sort of winnowing everything. They're like call them like accelerated Darwinism.
So, this civilization lives in the abyssal dead space, but did they always live there?
So that is an assumed no, because I mean, just very simply, we know they are human in origin, and we know humans did not come from abyssal dead space. Uh, as to where they might have come from, we know they came, from humans in either New Eden or Enoicus, depends. We're not sure where they entered it from. Uh, but there's a lot linking them back to some. Well, let's see. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that the Triglavians came from an older group of Jove. Now, I'm not going to name any specific one because that's where we get into like theory stuff. But there's a bunch of reasons where it just kind of fits. Back when they first showed up to invent their Tech 2 damage module, you needed sleeper encryption methods to perform the invention. They have detailed records of first and second Jove Empire things. They have archives of that. They reference those in a number of the Triglavian data streams. It just sort of, and then again, very specifically, the trinary uh, thing they do, especially in terms of data. Trinary data was always a thing, even since like 2004. That was always associated with the Jove. Back when a player killed a Jove named Veniel, way back, he dropped some trinary data, and that's a super far back thing. And then when someone found Leon de Barrow's shuttle out in wormhole space, not shuttle, sorry, exploration ship out in wormhole space, and she's a character who went in there to search for something and found what she was looking for, but she disappeared. Player found that ship, blew it up because they couldn't take it with them, and it also had trinary data inside of that. And then you have the trinary relics back with the Warzone extraction event, which very much seems to have been a very early lead in to where we are now with Triglavians. But there's just a lot of pretty blanket evidence to say, yeah, these guys probably come from or were very, very close with the Jove at some point in their history.
Yeah, trinary data specifically is like a real thing. So basically, we in all of our like human real world Earth computations use binaries, right? Zeros and ones. So a trinary state, a system would be a computational system that uses 3 states. What that means, it's hard to say, but it is believed that that's kind of how the Jove have mastered a lot of their higher level calculations and mathematics and understanding of the universe. And of course, that seems to have been inherited by the Triglavians in one way or another. One of the things that I do find interesting in the data streams is that there's a reference to Jove/Triglavian towers, implying that they lived somewhat conterminous with each other. They lived together and they worked together on a project, but it didn't seem like the Triglavians feel that they were one group, or at least they're not looking at them as one group anymore.
Yeah, they certainly see themselves as themselves. They're pretty prideful like that, definitely. That what is it, proper way of life kind of arrogance they have is what I always say.
Flow of virage. Yeah. The other thing is that they refer to the ancient domains, and when the World Arc first appeared in the known space, the World Arc battleground is known as the World Arc Proving Conduit, and in the video from Zoria that we received at that time, they say proving or
clandestic proving in the ancient domains commences.
Right, exactly. So in the original video, they say that the ancient domains have been lost to us. And then later on, they say that cladistic proving commences in the ancient domains. They also said that intruders from the ancient domains seek to corrupt the flow of virage. So all these references to the ancient domains implies that K-space is the ancient domains. And so they come from here at some point.
Yeah, at this point, I think I do agree with you about the ancient domains being K-space, or at least the New Eden cluster. I'd like to see what they would call, Anoicus themselves. But yeah, they have, the ancient domains. They have their flow of virage, which seems to be their whole sort of philosophy, but probably something more than that too. I mean, just reading into that, they have that domain of beyond, which seems to be pretty core to them. There's different, zones they seem to be naming.
Yeah, so there's specifically one point in which they say that they need to purge the Sancha, I think it was, from the flow of virage, the ancient domains, and the domain of Bujan. So these are 3 distinct realms of space, but especially that domain of Bujan, there's a lot of argument about what that might entail.
Yeah, definitely.
So how did these Triglavians first get in contact with us? How did we first learn about them?
So we first had our early teasings of the Triglavians way back way before the Abyss opened up. With the first time was when we had a hive fleet going on, and went pretty routine up until the second. I think it was the second to last room where we landed on top of like 50 drifters, who who killed us very quickly. But I think like I can't remember if it was. I think we managed to kill one of them at some point there, and actually no, sorry, I don't think it was those drifters we managed to kill the first time. That was just the first big group of them we saw all in one place. These came to be called death balls, just kind of for fun. The next time one of those showed up, though, it was at a gate in K-space. They just all appeared there, very, very damaged, as if they had just, come from some battle somewhere. And, when we went and killed all of them, of course. And in their wrecks, we found these trinary data vaults, which were an item in game with a description that was a hyperlink to a web page on CCP's servers with a little video clip. And in this little video clip, we had these really weird looking symbols. And then I think it was Triseo who figured out that, hey, this is, a script and that's a URL. So when we figured that out, we just sort of puzzled it through because the URL was pretty easy to figure out. And I think the metadata of that first video actually had information we used. And then when we went to that URL, we had a very, very tiny little piece of video. It was very obviously just like, super tiny little clip in pieces. This is the first piece of it. And, we saw these like weird rocks and like this red beam. And then the next time this happened, we had some more of that, figured out a few more of these letters, got them written down, started recording all that. And this next little video clip, we saw a freaky ship in the distant background that, turned out to be a Leshak way later. At this time, we had already seen some of the ships because they had been added to Sissy way earlier. And they weren't finished on there or anything, but we were like, okay, that's what that is. But story-wise, that's, where we first see, hey, whoa, what are these things?
In addition to that,
that all went on to, more and more of these drifter death balls, more and more of the vaults. We figured out the whole alphabet. We got that all recorded. I made a chart for that too. And the video clips ended up, I assembled all of them into a grid to literally just like jigsaw them together. And then we had these videos of the Abyss with drifters fighting Triglavians way down in there. And those were our first peeks at all of that.
Another thing they did was CCP actually sent to basically one person from all of the major news media. So I think Eve News 24, INN, and Crossing Zebras. Each of us received an email that was basically I think it was just a still image of the singularity ball, the big flaming red ball that's in the center of all Triglavian ships. And so obviously huge amounts of speculation came from. We got these little teases and videos all over the place.
Yeah, I actually forgot about that one. Yeah, that was the first really early tease before we had any idea what we were looking at. And everyone was like, oh, is it a star or something? And, that took the Triglavian ship popularity, and we're like, oh, that is.
Important to note about speaking, the drifters have a secondary shield that's known as the overshield, and then a major weapon system that's just called the Doomsday, I think, right?
Yeah, there's no actual name for it in game.
Right. So, but basically the way it works is that when you destroy the overshield, when you break the overshield, it randomly targets one of the ships or whatever. It attacks one of the ships that are attacking it and does an amazing amount of damage to it. This is noteworthy because all of the ships that have encountered the Triglavians, or that we saw in those death balls, the shields were broken, and they did not have their Doomsday. And this is actually consistent.
Sorry, I've actually got to argue on that one a bit because I think it might have been a few of them that didn't, but definitely at least the first few of them, they did all have their Doomsdays, and we would be popping them and dying, and
interesting.
We used our coercer fleets and just ran them all down. I think only a couple of them actually had the Doomsdays active though. I think the later fleets might not have, but I remember us just constantly just getting popped.
Interesting, because the reason why I noted this was because in the Abyss, when you encounter the drifter there, the Charybdis, it actually says in the description that its overshield and its Doomsday has also been dismantled. So it seems as if there's something that the Triglavians know how to do that disrupts that technology on the drifters.
Yeah,
it's also interesting to note
can't use those things in the Abyss at all, and they're way slower than they are outside of it too.
And the shield actually completely does not regenerate. There's zero regeneration on the shields inside of the Abyss for drifter ships. Other ships, the shield recharge is normal.
It's a super, super, super slow shield recharge. It looks
it's
like
zero
right now. 31,904 seconds. Oh no, that's the wrong one.
We double checked. We checked the stats,
right.
and I sat there and watched for 10 minutes, and they recharged not a single % of a hit point. The drifters in the Abyss space have no shield recharge.
Yeah, you're right. I was looking at the wrong stat. They don't have any.
At any rate, so the drifters, so our first sign was that the drifters were being hit by something, and then we found the videos of the Triglavians in the abyss from the Drifter Rex. And then Concord apparently discovered a Vedmak, and so a highly damaged Vedmak was brought to, I believe, Uli.
Yes, yeah.
And stayed there for about a little while as we were ramping up into the abyss expansion.
Yeah, that was in there for a few days. I think it was before FanFest, actually, FanFest 2017. I think it was, right. And it stayed there for like a week. And during FanFest, they had that new scope video that talked about that thing, and then said, "Hey, look, the Triglavian Collective." And that's the Triglavian Collective revealed. I think that was that scope video.
Correct.
As to how Concord got their hands on that, we still don't know. We know they captured it in some specific system and they named it, but I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. And let's see, there was all this like drama like being talked about, like, hey, this ship had crew, and the Sisters of Eve were like, hey, we'd like access to this crew for humanitarian reasons. And that never seems to have gone any further than it did there, but even that was something interesting. And then, in addition to that, so you have the different Triglavian suits we can buy and wear. The Encounter one, that red one, its description actually talks about this was sourced from this ship specifically, and the symbol on the shoulder on that, it's unknown what it means, but it could be some sort of specialized Triglavian, group or something. We still don't know what it means, but it's not any of the clade insignia or anything like that.
It's obviously
it's
obviously the 3IA.
So the description reads: the Encounter version of the Triglavian survival suit has been released to Capsuleer. Sorry, my bad. The Triglavian survival suit is a design derived from the specifications obtained by Concord from the clothing and equipment of the crew taken from the Vedmak class cruiser encountered in K-space by DED forces. The meaning of the symbols on the clothing is unclear, but they could indicate a specialized force or group of some kind. It's also worth noting that these are red, which is, so each clay has their own color scheme. This one's red, which seems to correspond with Zoria. So this may have something to do with their detachment into K-space.
Yeah, that is a fair guess, yeah.
So then the original filaments that we received were gotten out of pirate data and relic sites, or maybe data sites.
Yes. Yeah, and in terms of lore, they talked about, I think, things being found in the drone regions, and that might have been where some of that got sourced from also.
Right. So one way or another, the technology of the filaments and the things that activate the filaments got leaked out to the rest of the empires, or the pirates, and then eventually to us as the Capsuleers. And so we start going into the abyss. And so we have these data streams that effectively record the Triglavians' attempt to understand and decide what they think about each of the various different organizations that they ran into. So you have the Drifters, the Rogue Drones, Saunchus Nation, and ourselves. Those are the 4 groups that we have the data relics of. And they're split into 6 different records. The first 2 records seem to describe their initial exploits with those groups. Their third is where they start to become, make a decision about that group. And then 4 and 5 are generally more difficult to read than the other 2, and represent more of their current actions involving those organizations.
Yeah, what those 4, 5, and 6 ones for each of them specifically are from semiosis intercepts, basically from the semiosis consoles that we can get, and those are more so a lot of that specifically, it talks about here, hold on, let me just take a peek at it again so I can really make it right in my face. So the thing is, it's all the beginnings of each of these start with prayer of the executive detached troika, blah blah blah. They're trying to winnow discourses in relation to, say, ancient enemy Azdaha, or augmented foreign Rodnia. They're just trying to sort of winnow down the arguments and sort of come to a conclusion for each of them. Really, that's sort of what the 4, 5, and 6 kind of go for. And they talk about the process that they go through with, hey, this is some, more information about them, some past things, some now stuff, and what we want to do moving forwards. Especially the 5 and 6 for each of those shows that. With each of them, also the 4, 5, and 6, they have all these different little quoted parts too, which seem to, as far as I can tell, be like, okay, this is more direct, blah blah blah, translated, blah blah, rather than it being the raw Triglavian syntax that the rest of it seems to be in a lot of the time. And that's also where you get a lot of the things like talking about the old records of first and second Jove Empire stuff, where it says like in code Jove expansionist policy iteration 2 point blank point blank, that sort of thing, and that's where that'll be mentioned.
Yeah, so it does look like there's kind of multiple tracks. There's these interruptions in the line in the 5 and 6 that appear to be like breaks in communication. They're either interruptions or they're like asides, almost like parentheticals, where they explain a little bit more about what's being talked about. But there's also a lot more chunks that are just missing. There's pieces that are just listed as indecipherable. That makes full-on interpretation of the meaning of the text more difficult with those than in the previous ones.
Yeah, for sure.
So the other thing is that they use a very different language. They have a different way of speaking than normal people. And that kind of manifests itself in two different ways. One is that they do have a lot of Slavic influence, and so they'll use very kind of esoteric terms to talk about things. Like they don't say
very, like ritual focused for a lot of that, where we have like prayer and playful communion, and again they have like
Sobornost,
evoking things, and it's all
Pashlost.
sobernost, poshlost, all that. Exactly, it's all very ritual based language for a lot of it. But all in all, it's really just like a different sort of syntax. And if you read it, enough times and you try to figure out what it means, it does become quite clear. And then you start to think you're losing your mind. But you're able to get something out of it. Like say there's there's a description for the Zenitra on Tranquility and Singularity now, because the ship is technically in the game. And I look at that and it's basically like, okay, it's talking about, I forget what it was, Zenitra subclade of Veles clade. Brought back this old design. We're putting it out here without proving because we really really need this right now. So okay, now we put this out there, and that's sort of what that one will read as.
Well, yeah. So that actually brings up an interesting point, which is that there's a lot of references in the text to numbered clade ships. And
Yes.
it's not immediately obvious in the data streams, but if you then go and look at all of the descriptions of the various different ship types that you encounter that are piloted by the Triglavians, each one of them explain what they are. So each number is associated with a specific ship. So for instance, the Damovic is the Tactical Troika classification 3 clade ship. So 3 would be the Damovic, whereas whatever 721 or whatever is the Vedmak, or sorry, the Lishak. And so each one is kind of a multiple of 3 of the each one, the one previously, as you move up the ranks.
Yeah, and expanding on that too, the number, its tactical troika classification seems to have a lot of something to do with the crew. Specifically, you get that, and you can kind of expand on that from the one record that talks about, okay, it's a 3 tactical troika classification ship being, boarded by Sancha, and it is crewed by a tactical troika. A troika being a form of life in the Triglavian Collective that seems to be something like, so okay, in real life lore, Triglav is a 3 it's basically 3 in 1 god. It's 3 individual gods as one, kind of. In Eve, Troikas with the Triglavian Collective seem to be an assembly of 3 different individuals kind of working as one. Basically, one of each of the 3 different forms of life in the Triglavian Collective, which we can go into after this. working together as one being, and that's what Zoria Triglav is. That's what Kresnik Svarog is. And in terms of crew, a 3 tactical troika classification ship has 1 troika on it. We're piloting it. It has 1 Narodnia, 1 Navka, and 1 Kolstoy, and that would be 3 crew members. That's one thing. So sort of what a lot of us have taken from this forward is that's the number of crew that a Triglavian ship would be supposed to have, basically, with them making it and using it in the form of troikas. So that's why it's divisible by 3, always, especially because it's technically 1, but it's 3. That's the Domovic. There'd be 3 of them, which would be 3 troikas would be 9 individual kind of beings, and that would be the Kikamura, I think. And you just expand that upwards and upwards.
All right, so
I've got to
ask, what you said, different life forms there. Can you go into a little more detail about what you mean by that? Because that's something I've not heard
without getting into speculation.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Without doing all the speculation stuff, there are 3. So in the database for Eve, there are 3 different bloodlines technically for the Triglavians, but each of them has their name, and we actually get a lot of knowledge about one and one other of them, with the third one being a lot less known. But there's the 3 of them. It's going to be, like I said before, the Narodnia, the Navka, and the Kostroi. Starting with the Navka, I'll start with the Narodnia. More or less, that word translates in real life to people or folk or something like with us. So Nav is really that. And then Navka, according to someone who's talked to me about more Slavic things and she lives there, it's sort of like a group of people working together for something. That's sort of what that word means. But Narodnia, in terms of Eve, for the Triglavians, seems very much to be a flesh and blood human, because they have their Narodnia. Those are going to be the guys that we see literally wearing the suits that we've seen so far. We have the hive-linked foreign Narodnia, which are humans that are Sancha. We have augmented foreign Narodnia, which are capsuleers, who again are still a human body, despite obviously controlling ships differently, which they also note and go into on their little records. But yeah, so the first form, the Narodnia, seems really much to be flesh and blood humans. The second one is the Navka, coming from a couple of real life words there also. Nav in Slavic, old mythology, are like souls of the dead. And then you have Mavka also, which is another thing it sort of seems to be blended with, just word wise, where that's like the souls of the prematurely deceased, that sort of thing. These Navka in Eve seem to be so they're not something taking a human form and walking around as people. They are able to communicate with, suborn, and work with or take over, it seems, rogue drones, especially in the Abyss. And they've actually, so a lot of detached Navka, meaning, basically not part of Troikas or whatever, have gone off and joined rogue drones for stuff to get to figure out what they want to do with them as a whole. And that's what you actually see. So if you look at the rogue drones in the Abyss, you see them being part of the Navka overminds. And that's where that's coming from, because that's the Navka with them or controlling them. We don't even know which is which. They could be working together or taking them over.
Well, in the section on rogue drones, it says that basically the convocation of Triglav outside of the struggle, which represents basically the central council, ruling body, deciding feature of basically all of the Triglavians.
You can think of that as like Concord or the Tribal Assembly, where it's like, yeah, we all fight, but this is where we have to talk.
Right. So they effectively assign a detached Navka to go and try to be friendly with the rogue drones, specifically to attempt procession. And then in the next one, in 6, it states that they were successful. So the implication there is that, so actually, let me take a step back. When the rogue drones first entered into Triglav space, they entered into the area of the Dazbog subclade of the Svarog clade. Now, the Svarog clade is the most aggressive of all 3 of the clades, And the Dazbog subclade of the Svarog clade is just the biggest badasses in the Triglavian Collective that we know of. They're mentioned multiple times, and in every single case, they're kicking people's butt, including other Triglavians.
Subclade.
What?
The Belobog subclade is the one mentioned in the first Deviant Automata data stream.
All right.
Let me check this.
I can't help but feel like we're getting a little off the beaten path here, though.
Oh, yeah, a little bit.
Well,
but yeah, sorry, Ash, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
What I'm curious about is winding this back towards the actual things that happen. So we have Into the Abyss, and we get these filaments, and we go into the abyss or dead space, and what kind of happens there? What's our interactions with the Triglavians like? What are we getting a window into whenever we perform the abyssal content?
So that's a good one, actually. That's easy to go right into. What we're doing is, so when we use the filaments, are entering what they call the proving, because we know that's what it is. Because they mentioned Sancha, of course, managing to get out of there and do other stuff. But what we do in there is being proved. So they're allowing us to be here, and they're, testing us and rewarding us for being successful. That's why we have the caches and all of that. And, they're trying to get what they want to think of us, basically.
And how does
You're
that...
right.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Never mind. Go for it.
And how does that change over time? Because, we start with just these very basic single ship abyssals, something everyone's familiar with. But everything starts to expand from there. We get these new rooms that we start to get access to, and this all gets put out in lore. This becomes a very, very big thing. What's all going on there? What story's being told?
You can take some of this, Ash.
I would say that it happened in multiple stages. Okay, so stage 1, we get into the abyss, right? There's the 3-room things. We encounter all the different dudes. There's the caches, and then stage 2 was a special event into the abyss. No, Secrets of the Abyss. And at that time, that's when we started to get, if I remember correctly, that's when we started to get the trinary data streams, where you could actually take the data sheets, the red loot that the Triglavians drop, and you could put it in the caches, which is where the loot is inside of the abyss. And what would spit out is one of these trinary data streams. That is what we're referring to. So I call this like phase 2. And then phase 3 comes shortly thereafter, which is when they release the Frigate Abyss. And they change, they release the Frigate Abyss, and they release the PvP arena. So now they've begun cladistic proving in the flow of Virage at that point. Now that they've tested us, they're now testing us against each other. And then phase 3 would be the message from Zoria Triglav, where they hacked every billboard in New Eden and displayed a message from Zoria, which is very ominous and threatening, and kind of explains their position about all of the things. Specifically, they say that the drifters must be destroyed, Sancha must be destroyed, the rogue drones must conform or be destroyed, and then for us, they say that we must be proven. We must prove the direction of our flow, as they say. And then they say that those of us who are fit may be welcome within, and those who are not will be expelled. And so that kind of sets the tone for it. And around that time is when we start seeing the construction of the Zordash world arc. And then one final phase from there was more recently, which is when we now see the Triglavian Dreadnought, which somewhat corresponded with their messages about how the direction of their flow approaches liminality. So they kind of are implying that things are entering into the next stage, which is now what's going to lead us into chapter 2.
Yeah, liminality being basically the state of having started, but not having really undertaken a ritual or thing yet, basically. So where we are right now, the invasions, if you actually look on the gates, and they call them these things in a few places, there's some text on any of the invaded system gates, and it says liminal proving. And this whole thing, you had those liminal NPCs in the World Arc sites for a while before they were changed to another one also, now that things are moving forward. But the whole thing basically is, we are testing you right now, and we're going to see what we can do with you. And the ones of you who, again, have your flow correctly aligned can probably join us. That seems to be where it's headed.
They use the word flow to mean two things. One seems to be the physical nature of the abyss itself, but more importantly, as we talked about earlier, it kind of represents their philosophy. So they have there's two flows. There's the flow of virage, which is their flow. It's the flow that they want people to be part of. It's the flow that they're promoting. And then there's what's known as the Poshlost flow, which is like, Poshlost means there's not a direct English translation, but it's basically tainted or sinful, bad, corrupt.
Basically just irredeemably vulgar.
Vulgar, thank you. So you see this kind of internal, or you see this conflict, this meta conflict of the Triglavians, that they seem to be promoting this one ideology and they are against another ideology. And it does seem that at least they believe that the drifters most strongly represent that other ideology.
Yeah, or at least one counter to their own. That seems to be the whole thing, with Poshlost being, this is a bad thing, and this is the wrong direction for these groups to be taking, basically. That's their whole outlook on it.
Yeah, they use Poshlost in two different ways. Also, there's the Poshlost flow, which is, like I said, like an opposite ideology. But then they also say Poshlost to just mean bad. Like, for instance, when they talk about the rogue drones, they're trying to decide whether or not they can make them, whether or not they're Poshlost or could become Subornost, which means a partnership or working with.
Yeah, the whole thing with the rogue drones too was that the Triglavians were very undecided on them for the longest time. When they showed up, Svarogklid was like, okay, these things are Poshlost and we want to get rid of them. These have to be expelled from the, abyss. And then Velisklid is like, wait, we can do something with these guys. We can make use of them. And then Perunclid was like, I don't know yet. So that's when they went forward. That's why you have actually the the deviant automata suppressors in the abyss. Those are actually constructed by Svarogklid, because they're like, yeah, no, we don't like these things, we're getting rid of them. And then there's actually an unreleased pylon that helps drones that was in from the description. It's Velisklid doing that. And then, moving forward, you had the detached Navka, who all went over to rogue drones, and that's why we see the Navka overminds. They come back, they're like, okay, and they give their procession to the convocation, where they're like, okay, this is what we learned here. And from that, they decided, hey, okay, the rogue drones aren't going to be Poshlost, vermin, basically, but we can use them. And that's sort of
Yeah, sorry, you cut out. But to go back to what I was trying to say earlier, which I messed up, when I said the Svarogklid at first, I was wrong. You're right. It's the Belobog. The Svarogklid was the guys who dealt with Sancha. My bad. But so either way, the rogue drones, when they originally enter into the abyss, which they come to the abyss first, they entered into the Svarogklid's area, their home, and they just start tearing it apart. Like, they start destroying things. And that's why the Svarogklid from the very beginning do not believe that these rogue drones are redeemable. Meanwhile, the Velisklid comes back and rebukes against what the Svarogklid is saying and says, no, there's something here. We could possibly work with these guys, and maybe that's valuable to us. And so Perun, of course, steps back and says, I don't know either way. And they do what's called a consent lock, where they haven't made a decision, so they can't make a direction in one way or another. Eventually, what they decide to do is send a Nafka out to the rogue drones with the mission of trying to create metaxi, which is the middle path, try to find some sort of way to work with them and way to use them, again, with the idea of gaining procession, or, I assume travel, whatnot.
What I read procession as more is offering their procession to the convocation, being like, this is our conclusion and what we did basically, and information.
That's fair. But hold on. Oh yeah. So one of the other keys about this is that what they do discover is that different rogue drones behave differently, have different level of consciousness, different level of awareness. That some of them, in fact, are vermin, but some of them are redeemable.
Right.
And it says that. So control measures will be used in recovery. Detached Nafka has imperative to return to the domain of Bujan and offer procession to the convocation of Triglav outside of the struggle. So that's their imperative, whatever that means. And then in the next piece, it says that was successful.
Yes, yeah, that's all the Navka we see being the Navka overminds, and that's all of them coming back and saying, hey, and then, that came from that, exactly.
So are there any other major pieces of information about the Triglavians and their society that we need to know about in order to understand anything else?
Honestly, we've covered most of it at this point. I personally would love to know more about, their society and their people, because right now all we have are these very terse, military almost, summaries of things going on. And the only one we've actually seen talk about anything has been Zoria Triglav talking to us. So, really, no, we've really gone over just about, I think, all of sort of how they operate. Like what I said before, they're
Well,
three clades. They have the convocation to Triglav as kind of their core concord kind of thing. They are very, ritualistic and proving based. So things can be, glorified over some things, or, mortification is where it's sort of a step down. It seems to be, they don't like the drifters. Those are their ancient enemy. They don't like the Sancha because they are corruptive and something really bad for them, apparently, and they don't like them and want them just gone, period. They didn't know what to make of the rogue drones, and now they're like, okay, we can use some of these. And they don't know what to make of Capsuleers yet, so they are testing us to see how we could be of help to them if we go the right way. And that seems to be about where we are with them.
there's something about uh, multiple identities or a connective, like a hive mind, that they inherently do not like. It wasn't just the fact that the Sancha corrupted one of their Neurania and then later a multi-body tracking pylon. When they first encountered the Sancha, they had an ancient noema or idea, policy, whatever you want to call it, to destroy them because they had a hive mind. And when they encountered us,
ancient timed accepted noema of extirpation of hive-linked Narodnia. So it's like,
correct,
hive minds are bad.
And every single time that they see us, they specifically identify us as being a singleton format. In other words, there's only one mind in each of our bodies, and that seems to make us acceptable. So there was already something there that they did not like.
Exactly.
And then, of course, once Sancha started corrupting them, it was like game on, right?
And that's the whole thing too with the hive mind and corruption stuff. The Narodnia being the one they were able to corrupt, being the human being kind of more on board the ship, and whatever they did to that, whatever. I think that corruption also might you be able to feed that into how a troika might work, because corruption, the way they're talking about it, doesn't really sound like much stuff Sancha does for us. But if Triglavians and their Narodnia are connected to the other two in a troika via some implant method or whatever, that Sancha could hypothetically do something with, that would make sense for that corruption too.
Right. And it was serious enough that when it happens, they don't mess around and they literally just burn the ship. They sack everything in order to prevent the corruption from spreading. And then later on, when the clay pylon.
With that specific one, the one that got corrupted, you have the human being one get corrupted, and then the Kostroy is like, hey, we should self-destruct. And then the Navka is like, yes, we should. And they all just, self-destruct. And that's also something that happened. They did something with that when there were Sancha attacking one of our Ark citadels, actually, in Semike at one point. We did this little roleplay thing where we were like, hey, let's send this info to Kresnik Svarog. And we tried that. And I guess probably Delegate Zero or someone made a huge bunch of Triglavian ships spawned there. And I guess things didn't really go as the AI wanted it to. And they started also shooting the Citadel, but whatever. They ended up all self-destructing, though, also, after all this interaction with Sancha. So it seems to be basically get rid of any of this evidence of it. And if you were any contact with Sancha, self-destruct, because it's a real bad thing.
Right. The other thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to their actual, like, the nature of the Triglavians. So they have they divide their organizations into 3 different kinds of units. There is technical, there is militant, and then there is strategic.
And then you have the paramount version of some of those too, which seems to be more the like high level.
Right. So they have multiple of each of these troikas, and then there is the paramount of each one. So there's tactical troikas, and then there's the paramount tactical troika for any given subclade. It also appears as if each subclade is only one of the 3 associations, because they say communion with subclades tactical and militant. And then the strategic appear to be kind of like their commanders. And that is on a clade level, not a subclade level. So you have the technical and militant troikas, which are part of the subclades, and then you have the strategic troika, which kind of issues orders downward, and that would be part of the actual clade itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you could have those sort of paramount troika, sort of, if you wanted to lay this out in terms of Eve corporations, you could probably have that be like the CEO if they wanted to do it that way.
Right. So then the other thing I wanted to touch on, because we mentioned them, but not entirely. So there's 2 entities that we have named, right? There's Zoria Triglav, and then there's Krezhnik Svarog. It is kind of agreed upon at this point that Zoria Triglav is in fact the detached executive troika for the sublimation of the Pashlost flow, which is kind of the main character of the different data streams. It's the entity that's reporting back and asking questions of the convocation of Triglav outside of the struggle. And
for all except the HFN 5 and 6, which is the other one.
Correct. And so what happened that so we believe that that's true because Zoria Triglav is an emanation of the clades of Svarog, Perun, and Velez. So they would be a representative of all of Triglav, and that's why they have the last name of Triglav. Whereas what happened was when as I said, when you get to about the 3rd record, you see what they call a winnowing of the discourse, which is basically, okay, we've talked about this enough. Let's sort this all out and figure out what we feel about these people, right? But when you get to the
4th record for each.
Right. So when you get to the Sancha, they have a different reaction. The convocation of Triglav outside of the struggle actually denies the process of winnowing, and then immediately begins the establishment of an entirely new organization, a new special operations troika that is completely designed to just destroy the Sancha. And they say that they take that from the Dazbog subclade of the Svarog clade, and that would become what we now know as Krezhnik Svarog, who, interestingly enough, we have not actually encountered in game, even though we've seen records and communications from them.
Yeah, Krezhnik being, of Svarog and all those ships that showed up again to not exactly shoot the Sancha. All those were also assigned to Svarog clade, so that's assumed to be under Krezhnik right there. And yeah, basically, yeah, exactly. It's all as you said. Krezhnik's entire thing is, hey, there is literally no wiggle room. There is no chance we're ever gonna have any change of heart or do anything but get rid of Sancha. That's like all we're gonna do with them. And that's funny that they're that hostile about it. Where even with ancient enemy Azdaha, there is the winnowing of discourses.
I want to correct myself. 1 through 3 is their early interactions. 4 is when they winnow, and 5 and 6 are kind of like post winnowing. So in this case, it says convocation of Triglav outside of the struggle invokes imperative special operations troika, extirpation of the corrupted Narodnia from Dazbog subclade of the Svarog clade. So yeah, they made it a special unit That is, their assignment is to extirpate Sancha, destroy Sancha outright.
All right.
Beyond that, the only other thing that I would chime in about this is that with all of we talked about the tactical Troika clade ships and their numbering system. That's how they refer to their own ships. The names that we use for them, Damavik, Vedmak, Radiva, Lashak, those are the name of the subclade that originally released it to the rest of the group. So the Vedmak subclade is the ones who made that ship, and the Damavik subclade is the ones who made the TTC-3, for example.
Right, exactly. Oh, also, a funny thing about names, if you want to go into that again, the names of each of the subclades and these ones that are, oh, actually, a lot of the ship names, at least, and a lot of the subclades seem to be more based on creatures and monsters and dragons and stuff. Where you do, of course, you do have some of the ones that are gods and stuff, but a lot of them seem to be more, again, monsters and creatures and stuff. Where the high clades and again a couple of the others are more named after gods. Where you'll notice that have like Zoria, Triglav, and that sort of thing. Where again, that's a little thing I wanted to throw out there. Damavik being some little protective house spirit thing. Leshak being this forest whatever sort of creature thing also. Let's see. The Zernithra, the dreadnought, is named after some dragon, some Slavic dragon.
Dragon wizard.
Yes, dragon wizard. Yes, that was it. And see, that's more like, again, like things more than gods.
Right, but the clades themselves are named after the gods.
Exactly, yeah. Perun, Veles, and Svarog, the three gods that actually make up Triglav in, real life lore. Well, Veles varies, but
Well, that brings us about to an hour deep in this recording. So I think we're probably safe to start going into speculation territory here. So, what do you guys think you know about the Triglavians?
Well, where would you like us to start? Pick a place and we'll just web out from there.
Go with whatever's most interesting. That's what I want to hear. I don't know what the speculation could even start from at this point.
Okay, I got this. So, obviously, the Triglavians have some sort of relationship with the Drifters. And as we discussed in a previous episode, the Drifters have emerged from the ruins of the Sleeper civilization. And as we also discussed, the Sleepers themselves are actually the remains of the Second Jovian Empire, specifically the static faction of that empire, and were once known as the Architects. And these were the kind of the smart guys in the Jovian society. It's also known that the Jovian disease, which is the downfall of the Second Jovian Empire, there was a period of time that's known as the Shrouded Days, which not even the Jove really fully understand. And basically, they went into the Shrouded Days, a very successful, although not as good as the First Jovian Empire society, and they left the Shrouded Days a broken people with the Jovian disease. So there is a question of like what happened here, right? And
that part of their history is just lost to the Third Empire.
Exactly. And so what we do know is that the Sleepers kind of come from that time period. They left at the end of the Second Jovian Empire, and specifically, the Jove believed that the Architects should be able to have some sort of answer to the Jovian disease, and when they did not, they turned on the Architects, accusing them of creating the Jovian disease. And so that's why they left, became Sleepers, found Anoicus, etc., etc. We also know that the Triglav at least know of this time period. They recognize the Drifters as being from that era. They call themselves the Ancient Enemy, and in fact, they try to identify them as of the Chamber of Tyrants. The Tyrants being the leadership of the Second Jovian Empire, but they also say that they don't seem to be exactly that. They say that they can't identify the locus of control. They say that there's inconsistencies with with the drifters and the tyrants, it seems to imply as if they're like, well, these guys are calling themselves the tyrants, but we don't think that they actually are.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that leads into the theory that the drifters are in fact the other, which is an artificial intelligence that has effectively taken over control of the construct, which is where the sleepers live, the virtual reality matrix, as it were, and is now broken free in the form of the drifters, and the Triglavians recognize them, at least for somewhat who they are. So either way, the Triglavians have some history with these people. I personally believe that the Triglavians represent the modifiers. So the drifter, or sorry, the Jove throughout their whole history have at various times cropping up these two kind of ideological differences, and they were especially highlighted during the Shrouded Days and then beyond. As they began more and more genetic modification of themselves, there became a conflict between those who believed that they should continue doing genetic modification and those who believed that they should stay the same. That the people who believed that they should stay the same were the statics. The people that believed that they should continue to do mutations and such like that were the modifiers. And if you look at the nature of the Triglavians, they are all about evolution and change and proving and biology and mutaplasmids and all these kinds of things. And so I think that the Triglavians are actually the modifiers from this central conflict. Whatever happened during the Shrouded Days, it was related to the Sleepers and the Triglavians, which leads me to my most aggressive theory, which is that I believe that it will one day be revealed that the Triglavians themselves created the Jovian disease, and possibly the disease that also took out the Talakan.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So if I had to give my own side of these things too, there's a lot of that I actually like and probably go along with pretty heavily too. In terms of them being modifiers, obviously, like if you had to classify Triglavians as a Jove anything, obviously they'd be modifiers. Exactly. And even, with the book that talks about, Templar 1, where they talk about when the Jove disease showed up and everything, no one's sure where it came from exactly. So totally could be something totally intentional trying to, well, one of the things that was told in Templar 1 is like, hey, what if the disease was made on purpose to try to force everyone to go into the sleeper VR? And I can kind of I'm going to run with that into basically not, this is not exclusive from them being modifiers, but in terms of a named faction, I think personally, that the Triglavians came out of what we have been told about as being called the Enheduani, which is another old Jove group. And basically, these were the guys who were in charge of the sleeper construct and the sleeper VR. Basically, they were the administrators. And when the others showed up, obviously there was conflict between them. And we see no signs of anything like them in wormhole space anywhere. What we do see, though, there's this, and this is me looking through it later on, obviously. You have the Oruz construct and the Oruz Osobnik, which are different sleeper things that were put together. And they say they're massively, rearranged and changed and stuff. These are not normal sleeper things, and these are the only two other instances that I can think of in any of the past game lore that have any sort of Slavic sounding text to them at all. Starting that right there. Then with all this, you have So personally, I think the Enheduani were sort of rolled into the Triglavians by CCP as the Enheduani, going back to like the Odyssey, one of the other short stories. Their whole thing was basically, we have this one sort of direction we think civilization should go in, and they're all like, oh, the Minmatar match this most, so we like them. And things happen there, and the third Jove Empire is trying to say, hey, no, to these guys moving in the shadows. And wait, I'm honestly tripping over my own feet here, trying to figure out what I'm trying to say next.
So basically, the Enheduani started out as the caretakers of the sleepers. So Yeah, in the early days, in the very, very beginning of the Jovian Empire, when there were just basically a bunch of arcs traveling through space that got cut off from their original civilization when the Eve Gate collapsed, the Heduani were the caretakers of the ships. So while the architects slept in their virtual reality constructs, or virtual reality and suspended animation, you had these Heduani that basically maintained the ship, made sure that everything was kind of kept up and done properly. And
and from there, they ended up sort of becoming more from, they stopped being, over time, they evolved from more of that caretaker group into being sort of a shadow government during uh, the Second Empire, more so by that time. And with all of that, they were all, trying to manipulate things behind the scenes to get their civilization to move in the direction that they wanted. And at the end of the Second Jove Empire, where the sleepers disappear because everyone's like, hey, why haven't you been able to help us? The Enheduani also are no longer there. And after they're gone, much longer later, you have, so around the time of the Battle of Vakatioth, which is when the Amar attacked the Jove, that happened sort of on the heels of these Enheduani guys still trying to make changes and subtly influence the direction of Eve's civilizations. Specifically, they wanted the Minmatar.
Right. So in Templar 1, there is a character named Grievous, who is Grievous, sorry, who actually isn't. Yeah. Hey there. No. And this is actually an AI recording of a Jovian intelligence who's kind of info dumping about everything. But in his story, he directly accuses the Aheduani as being the people who manipulated events to cause the Battle of Vakatioth, which was the battle in which the Amar got their butts kicked really hard by the Jove, which led to the Minmatar Rebellion and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it is known that these, or it is accused that these Heduani have had influence around the universe throughout all the time. As the Jovian civilization emerged and as they kind of became into the First and Second Jovian Empire, the Heduani functioned as kind of the intermediaries. They communicated between the sleeper civilization, the architects, and the rest of the Jove. And so what happened was, over time, they began to manipulate that communication. They were think of it like a priest, right? Like, only I can speak to God. In this case, it's like only we can speak to the people that we trust to actually make decisions and think of things for us. So we get to tell you what they think, and we get to tell them what you're asking. And over time, they began to become more and more obsessed with the fact that they knew how things should be. And obviously that caused its own problems. Might have been another piece of the leading up to the Shrouded Days, but it does show that they, even after that fact, they've continued to feel like they know better. And so a lot of the times when you see Jove being accused of manipulating events throughout the history of Eve, it is often directly accused of the Heduani specifically.
Right, exactly. And drawing right from that into the where I totally sidetracked myself with all of that, I think the Enheduani were rolled into being the Triglavians, because there is an Enheduani shaped huge gaping hole in the lore of Eve where these guys were manipulating stuff from behind the scenes, doing all these important things, and yet we have never ever seen anything of them in the game or from any in character standpoint. Nobody knows about them. Then you have that Grius guy who told us all about, in Templar 1, the history of the Jove and talked about them. Grius was actually in Theodicy as well. He was one of the ones trying to fight the influence of the Enheduani, but, he's alive during that. By the time Templar 1 rolls around, which is, again, a few hundred years later, he is dead. And he is this infomorph record of Grius, basically, at this point. And he says he picked the wrong side and it cost him his life. And by this point, he seems to be more so taking the side of the Enheduani against the other. And then that's where so that's another factor where I'll just take that and I'll roll in, okay, Grius is now this AI reconstruction of this living person who doesn't have a human form, who came to this guy's ship on this little probe thing. And if they had to roll that in, I'd say Grius in that would be a Navka if you wanted to look for a really direct, like, okay, how could they be? But yeah, so you have the Enheduani. They liked the Minmatar. They said the Minmatar were closest to achieving what they themselves had, uh, basically being different tribes working together as one, people working together as one, even without the consciousness of a like single nation to define them. Different tribes, again, which can fight, working together when they need to. Then you take that and go right to the Triglavians, different clades, they all fight, they work together when they need to. You take that, you have let's see. Yeah, I mean, you just go right from there. That's sort of where I built that from. There's all sorts of stuff I've written about it. It's just I can't say it all here because I'll take 3 hours for it. But there's a lot of little things here and there that make me think the Enheduani basically were built into the Triglavians. And with the Enheduani again, then you have the others being something they really didn't like, rebelling against their VR construct that they are administering and, breaking the rules. And as far as we can tell, the others won because the Enheduani aren't there anymore, anywhere in Anoikis or anywhere near the sleeper stuff. So where'd they go? We don't know. Well, maybe we do. That's basically where it starts from.
Right. And to go down this rabbit hole a little bit further, if you go to Anoikis, you actually have two major entities that exist there. You have the sleepers, as we know about, but then there's the remains of the Talican civilization. And the Talican were the people who supposedly created the Dyson swarm around W477 TAC-P, which we now know as Caroline Star, and caused kind of all of this to happen, created Anoikis, et cetera, et cetera. It does appear, if you go and look at, read through its stuff and go through the Eric Jalon project and the things that they discovered there, that it does seem as if there was the sleepers and the Talican encountered each other. They interacted with each other and possibly even fought each other. And from this conflict, there emerged a disease, something that broke through quarantine. And even if I was going back through the Eric Jalon project, which happened before Templar 1, so before our understanding about the other and all that stuff, and they theorized that it was either a biological disease or perhaps some sort of AI, computer disease, as it were, a sentient computer virus, which sounds very much like the other. So, or possibly both. So it seems as if there was some sort of conflict between the sleepers and the Talican, which resulted in the sleepers possibly inflicting this disease upon the Talican. And then it is possible, not all the way there, but possible that the Talican also basically counterstriked against the sleepers by basically injecting the other. But that one's less clear. I do find it more than coincidence that you see the fall of the Jovians being a disease-related thing, the fall of the Talican being a disease-related thing, and then now suddenly you have a bunch of people that are all about biology.
Well, if I can speak to a couple of these things, we don't know of any fall of the Talican, but yes, obviously that quarantine, there's something there that the sleepers, or at least the ones that were in charge of them, thought was bad and had to be quarantined. In terms of timeline, also though, there's a funny thing where so the first Jove Empire, it took me a while to really, once I put together the whole compilation thing, that lasted from around 12,000 AD to around 20,000 AD. So that basically, you have this 8 to 9,000 year long empire that was much longer than any of the rest of them. And the construction of the Talocan Dyson sphere took place just right during the first Jove Empire, basically. So you could have, hypothetically, easily have had them interact at some point, exactly. And the first Jove Empire, the modern Jove, obviously no less of than even the second. It's in some places where a lot was lost basically after the end of the Second Empire. I totally would think that the Talocan could have had interactions with the sleepers and the ones in charge of them in Anoikis way back then. You also have that like Talocan exchange depot, and like there's a lot of stuff to suggest, hey, this stuff is way older here, but these guys probably interacted.
So that actually brings me to a question that I wanted to ask you about, because you know a lot about the Jove. You're one of the people that know the most about the Jove, I would say, of anybody I know. Uh, so the tyrants, right? We know the first tyrant and his name and what he did. Basically, when the first Jovian Empire fell, they kind of fell into disarray, into warring factions, and then there's this one dude who kind of unites them all once again into an empire. His name starts with M. I'm sure you know it.
Yeah, it's Miko Bor.
That's right. And so he becomes the first quote unquote tyrant. And then he creates the chamber of tyrants, or the chamber that is this ruling body of the Second Jovian Empire. Um, do we know anything? It suggested that the first tyrant was possibly from the Static faction, but do we know anything about the Chamber of Tyrants after its original formation?
No, honestly, we don't have a lot written about it. What we know about it really, though, is when Miko Bor founded the Second Empire, he forced everyone to join him, basically. But, after everything is founded, he didn't want to be, some despot. So what he did was, again, like you said, found the Chamber of Tyrants. So it had the ruling chamber, which was the central governing body of the Second Empire, basically. And then in that, you had one representative from every enclave that was a part of the Second Empire. And from within there, among themselves, they elected someone to be brought up to the Chamber of Tyrant, which was the head position in the Second Jove Empire. And that's about all we know really about that group, but that was just sort of how it worked.
The reason why I ask is because in AEA 5 and 6, the ancient enemy Azdaja, the drifter encounters, they specifically seem to be kind of obsessed with the drifters' association with the Jove Empire Chamber of Tyrants. They say that patterns recovered pertaining to the Jove Empire Council of Tyrants indicating anomaly in ideological development. So they're saying that these guys are a little bit different than the tyrants. And then later on, it says that exploratory operations have failed to establish an active locus of presence for the Jove Empire and the Council of Tyrants.
Okay, so yeah,
I guess my question is, why would the drifters, assuming that they are the other, attempt to mimic the tyrants?
all right, I can go right into that. That's a good one here. Basically, the other and the rest of the others, because there's more than one of them, they're all a spontaneous artificial sapient type of life that showed up in the sleeper VR and knew it was a fake world and started going around trying to tell the sleepers, hey, this is a fake world. They wanted out. If you have them, basically, so there's a couple of ideas people have brought up. If the others are truly just some spontaneous thing, or if maybe they're sort of also just, I think I've never watched it or read it or seen whatever it is. A friend of mine talked to me about Westworld, where it was something like fragments of basically some people think that the others might have been sort of fragments of other dead minds in the VR. And again, not the actual minds themselves, just sort of memories and things like that, kind of becoming new things within it, kind of spontaneously over time with centuries and millennia of runtime that this thing was going through, where they know that this world is fake intrinsically and they just want out. And if they wanted to get out, and if you had I guess the main other, whichever one might have been in charge, saying, okay, these are the guys who were glorious and on the outside, and this is what we should be. Basically, I feel like if the drifters are the drifters are mimicking the tyrants 100%, and they're sort of taking up that mantle because that's what they aspire to, basically being a big, full, true sort of Jove empire again is that's what I imagine them to be heading towards. And that runs right into them going after the Triglavians, because way back when the tyrants did their thing, Miko Bor did his thing. He basically militaristically subjugated every other Jove group that was out there and forced them to join the Second Jove Empire. And that obviously worked very well back then because it stabilized everything. But the drifters are also obviously they're like, yeah, this is our thing. We don't need anyone's help. We're going to do what we need to. and this is what we're going to do. And now they're going after the Triglavians. And I think they've modeled themselves after the tyrants basically because they're like, yeah, we want to restore the Jove, basically. And they see themselves probably, as Jove.
Yeah, the thing that I like to say, because I like to feel my way too clever, is that the other stole the tyrants from the dreams of the sleepers. In Templar 1, they show we have two kind of glimpses of the construct. The first one is that it's this entirely idyllic heaven kind of civilization, but that there was this anomaly, these children with black eyes that were violations of everything, and that the person who was experiencing this inherently hated that they spoke to the fact that the world that they lived in was a lie, and so the sleepers rejected these people that we now know as the other, and so the other grew bitter about this, and so eventually the other, of course, reaches out, finds Jamil, infects her, rewrites her brain basically to take her over, and then uses her power as the Empress of the Amar to get the Amar to start harvesting the sleepers, which causes absolute destruction to the constructs in the sleeper civilization. And it would seem as if at a certain point, right before the Drifter's appearance, that the other fully won, that the sleeper behavior changed, it was noted. And then we start seeing the sleeper caches, this Caroline Star, Drifters arrive, and all this other stuff. And it's also really interesting to note that in the sleepers that are found in Anoikis are known as Epheles. I'm terrible at pronouncing names.
So the Ephialtes ones, those
That's
are the
the
ones
ones.
in the abyss. Yeah. Those are
Right,
the
and
seeker drones. And you have the
right,
lucid sleeper drones, which is basically, this is active now.
so Ephialtes was a senator from Greece, Athens, and he was known as is basically remembered through time. Not to go into a whole bunch of Greek culture or whatever. He's now known as a traitor. He's seen as a treacherous person to the overall Greek civilization, and it's
So
also
going against exactly, going
right.
against what was in charge before.
Correct. So, given the fact that the Drifters and the Jove and the Sleepers all have this kind of Greek influence, all their words are Greek, all their names are Greek. The fact that you see these sleeper drones that are named after this guy seems to imply that these are the traitorous sleepers, that these are the ones that have defected and began to work with the other.
Yeah, I definitely see something there, because I don't think by any means that the Drifters are all others or something. I think that they are others and sleepers who both want to be out of a fake world and do their own thing. So yeah.
I also believe another one of my theories about all of this is that I think that the pirates are the ones who stole the technology for the filament devices, and that's why we got it from them first.
So I can actually speak to that a little also if you'd like.
Okay.
But yeah. We're entering the proving because they're letting us in. I think the filaments are something that they've put out here so we can get in there. Because again, with the filaments, the only places we enter are places they want us to be. And I think that's kind of where that started. Because you had them originally, I think, there was a news article that talked about them coming from rogue drone areas at first, and that's where the pirates were getting them or something like that. And
Right.
yeah.
So
I
actually,
feel
going
like
into that real quick,
yeah.
rogue drones have always had associations with Isogen 5, which is the substance that basically creates wormholes, right? Like the energy that is released by the destruction of Isogen 5 is the very energy that creates basically the rifts in space-time. And so it makes somewhat sense, even though we don't understand what the rogue drones are doing or why they want it or who's leading them in that point. We do know that they have interest and are collecting Isogen 5, so, or at least did before it all blew up. And so the idea would be that the rogue drones found a way into the abyss, which is where you see that first encounter with the Svarog. I personally believe that this was either the first or second of the events that we see described in the data streams. You see the two earlier events would be the meeting the drifters and then meeting the rogue drones. It seems as if they probably met the rogue drones first because they have the longest kind of story with them. Like it takes a while for them to go from point A to point B, whereas all of the other ones, like Sancha's pretty immediate. Us, we know they didn't have that much time with us. So I think that the idea is that these Triglavians have been hiding or locked away or whatever you want to call it. The ancient domains have been lost to them. And at a certain point when they encounter the ancient enemy Azdaja, they realize that either way their home is no longer safe, but also that the world above is not completely destroyed and is not inhospitable and could be returned to. And so I think that from there they started the process of wanting to go back so that way they could take their fight to the ancient enemy. The second thing to happen would be that after that, then they deal with the rogue drones. And from that, they begin to, I think that's what procession means, that the detached Nafka follows the rogue drones into K-space and uses that to basically find a path back to the realm of Bujan, the home of the Triglavians, to help them figure out a way to get back to K-space. And so they basically reverse engineered the filament devices from the tools that the rogue drones were using. That's when they send out a scout, which is then captured by Concord, as we know as a Vedmak. That filament technology is then leaked out and captured by the pirates. And then two different groups start going in, Sancha and us. Sancha goes in, and when Sancha begins to infect their people, they freak out. There is something about their consciousness and the way that they function with their minds and the relationship with the Nafkas, who appear to be pretty disembodied, and their three-minded Trioka, that makes this idea of a corrupted hive mind just super dangerous to them. So unlike the drifters, where it's like, well, we don't agree with these guys, we're fighting this ancient war with them of ideology, the Sanchas are an existential threat. And at that point, that's when you see them ramp up their aggression and their desire to return in force to the ancient domains, which leads directly into the invasions.
That is I like a lot of what you said there. I don't think Sancho specifically is the reason they've come back to the ancient domains, being K-space and all. I think a lot of it's really them trying to. So the Triglavians are setting something up right now. Since the very beginning with the world arcs, they've been modifying local space-time and things like that. Now with the stellar accelerators, they're planning something even bigger. My personal theory is that the map's going to end up changing, and they're going to end up doing their own stuff with some connections and systems and new places to go and things like that. But in terms of who got there first to the abyss, so I don't think the Triglavians have been trapped there. I think they were staying there and they were safe there, and that's where they just lived now. And now with people coming back to them, they're like, okay, we got to do stuff now. Basically, coming back into New Eden and all that. With the drifters, though, with ancient enemy Azdaha, we know that. So okay, back when Hill Tukos sent that video, when we saw that with all the drifters over at the hive, we never knew where they went. And later on, we find the Nexus gates, which have what seem to be an entry and an exit. And as basically, my whole thing is, I think the Nexus gates were how to get into the abyss. And the drifters basically rode the wave of Caroline Star through those Nexus gates to reach the abyss. And that's how they re-entered that. And that's how this whole thing started.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that I will throw out there that I think it's very possible that the drifters also caused Caroline Star. It is noted that the Jove stopped watching the star at that point in time, so it's very possible that they found a way back to the star and blew it up, just in the same way as they triggered the original Apocrypha event to release or to open up Anoikis in the first place.
Well, yes, and also to modify that statement, the Salem incident did not happen the way they wanted. They definitely didn't want the whole thing to just blow up. The Thuckers blew up the Isogen 5, and then poof, wormhole space is open to everyone all of a sudden.
Well,
My whole thought is
the
that basically they were collecting the Isogen 5 with suborned rogue drones, and when that popped early, space-time got real messed up because everything got screwy. My whole thought line there is obviously that the drifters weren't ready to emerge yet. They were stockpiling, getting ready, and once things were ready, they would have done their own thing and had full control of the wormhole network, and there wouldn't be any unstable wormholes. Space wouldn't be messed up. We wouldn't have had shattered planets or anything like that. I think it was completely a miscalculation, because then you have also way back then Jamil's Abaddon sitting outside that station getting refueled and stuff. These places wormholes weren't planned to open when they did, basically.
I don't know about that, because so the other did lead Jamil to go find the super weapon. Like the
Yes.
other consciously put the super weapon into play.
Yes,
So
yeah,
I guess I would say that I don't. It might have been an accident, but it doesn't seem like the other minded what happened too much, because it was a part of his process of becoming freed. Fonsui points out to me Ephialtes. If you really want to know more about that, specifically, if you've seen the movie 300, the ugly dude that betrays them all, that's Ephialtes.
Yeah.
So, the one thing I do have to ask now, as we're getting pretty deep into this, is that obviously we've got Chapter 2 planned for the 23rd, and that's in 3 days now. And given how rapidly the storyline's developed, it feels like one of the fastest storylines we've seen in even a long time. What do you guys think is going to happen, other than the Dreadnought coming in, which I think has been all but confirmed at this point?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you go on this, Ash.
Yeah. So Concord has been studying the Triglavian stellar accelerators, and so have developed their own version of it, known as the Stellar Observatory. And it seems as if they're using the Stellar Observatory to just kind of monitor the new Triglavian stellar observatories that are kind of an evolution of the accelerators that we now have. In Chapter 2, we are going to be asked to side with one side or another and help them basically stop the other person on the star, it would seem, culminating in a dread fight that we help one side or the other stop the other side. What's interesting about that is in the description of the Triglavian stellar accelerator, like I had a lot of theories about this. Like in the in the stellar accelerator, it says that it's possible that the Triglavians are attempting to weave the sun into their conduit network, and that they might be attempting to add this solar system into their domain, which sounds super ominous.
Oh yeah.
But as a follow-up, these new stellar observatories specifically say that the Triglavians are using space-time manipulation to literally harvest material directly from the heart of the sun. Now, why are they doing that? Who knows? But it's also spooky.
Yeah, a thing with that, specifically the harvesting stuff from stars. I've wanted that sort of thing forever, basically, as a mechanic, to say, hey, let's get stuff closer to these gorgeous stars. If you wanted to go that way, though, if Isogen 5 ever was to become a thing, that sounds like a pretty good way to, if you had a structure harvesting from a star, to be able to get that sort of stuff for whatever important story and game mechanic reason you might need it for. But yeah, exactly. You have the stellar accelerators, you have the Triglavians going to do some spooky stuff to stars, and that'll be the next big thing. You have us, for the first time ever, being able to officially take their side and work with them against someone else. And this thing is just advancing faster and faster. And we had Invasion Chapter 1 6 months ago. We have Invasion Chapter 2 coming now. And 6 months from now is just after FanFest. And my whole guess is that that'll be when we get Chapter 3, which will be the culmination of everything coming after, FanFest, just on the heels of that and going into something real big. So I'm really, really interested to see where they kind of take Chapter 2.
It is worth noting that there is actually two. So the way that the Concord monitors all this stuff is that there's different cases, right? So there's case red gamma, and case red gamma would be the Triglavians and drifters. They lump them together. And so we've known about case red gamma for basically as long as we've had drifters. However, we also have a new case, which happened about this time last year. Vegas last year, actually, I think it was.
Case green magic, you mean?
Yep, case green magic, which is it actually was kind of hinted at earlier than that, but effectively there's been a increase in kidnapping of ships within the space lanes between Molten Heath and Iridia, so that southern kind of band. And eventually it was accused of the Sancha doing it, and so Sancha is now that operation is case green magic. When that happened, they formed a new organization known as Aegis. And when the Zordosh was discovered, Makoto actually on the internet, on the Summit forums, basically demanded that Concord give him more information. And at that point, the head of the Aegis organization stated that Case Red Gamma has now been moved under Aegis along with Case Green Magic. Why is this important? Well, the Case Green Magic story originally started as kind of a precursor to the Project Nova, live events, so to speak. And while obviously the delay in Project Nova caused that storyline to kind of falter a little bit, they still keep kind of toying with it. And at the same time, if you read the lore about like what's going on during these invasions, the Triglavians are like raiding structures, stealing key equipment. That's the reason why Blackout happened. It wasn't because of the Drifter attacks. It was because the Triglavians were putting so much pressure on the the quantum entangled helium-4 that they just didn't, they took out major supply lines. These were strategic attacks by the Triglavians in order to hamper and steal resources from the empires. So as we're ramping, say again? Yeah, sure. Go.
Can I cut in here for a sec? So the conclusion with a lot of stuff for what the Triglavians were doing, basically they weren't aiming to inflict casualties, and if they did anything and took any people, it was really, the whole thing is they're looking at it as it being intelligence gathering with them. The Drifters, on the other hand, were, during the Blackout, attacking facilities, specifically also like stuff for the Fluid Router Network, and we're also raiding material processing places and literally just clearing them out entirely and basically taking all the people also. And that's what was going on there. The Blackout is accredited to, I think it's supposed to be basically both of them. It's just the strain of everything altogether. But yeah, then you have the Triglavians doing ground troops and stuff. You have Triglavian soldiers, I guess, along with rogue drones being used with them. And yeah, exactly. Aegis matches immediately into that, of course, with the Project Nova and clone soldier type stuff just immediately.
Right. And so, and then also with the increases in taxes, what we're seeing is that the empires are actually working on what amounts to new clone soldier technology as a way of combating these new threats. So combine all of that with the fact that the Sancha are continuing to raid facilities and take over ships in the space lanes, and the fact that there seems to be a new faction of Sancha known as the Vomoshka Chorus that apparently has destroyed some sort of station. You see attacks by the Vomoshka Chorus. You then see direct follow-ups immediately after by the Triglavians that seem to be hunting them down. All of this stuff seems to be coming together, and CCP seems to be weaving this plot, which allows them to kind of merge these different games, storylines, however they want to go forward with this. They're building themselves tools to kind of enter into this peaking point that seems to make sense to hit sometime around second quarter next year.
Yeah, basically, yep. I'm really interested to see where they take this. They're really building this Triglavian stuff in pretty like hardcore and quickly. Honestly, my guess for the end game of all of this is the Triglavians showing up as a full-fledged faction.
Really? Do you think one day we'll be able to make Triglavian characters in the character creator?
To some extent, I would think possibly, yeah. Because they already have, again, the 3 bloodlines and stuff. There's all sorts of ways they can make it work. I don't know how they might, but I mean, they're fleshing out this entire ship line, and they're allowing us now to work with them. I have ideas. I don't think any of it's solid yet, but I would not be surprised if they lean in that direction. And then, of course, if we end up helping the Triglavians, what are the Drifters going to start doing?
Right. So, and this also goes back to the fact that all of our technology that we use from the Triglavians are listed as precursor technology, which the Drifters would also be considered precursor technology. So, if this escalates at a certain point, it does. They have left the door open to allow Drifter tech to fall into our hands as well. My tinfoil theory about all of this is CCP is dabbled with or danced around this idea in the past, potentially using Jove as a method of making permadeath characters. And so while it doesn't really make sense for CCP to make too many like gold ships where it's like, oh, you pay Plex and now you have a Raven that doesn't take any skills and has really cool damage and doesn't actually take into your account, you're effectively a perfect Raven pilot. What might happen is they might sell pilots where you can purchase a specific clone, and that clone contains a set of skills that you can then use, but that clone has permadeath. So I think that might be one of the things that they might do with the Drifter Triglavian stuff as we move forward.
Yeah, I've honestly thought a lot about burner clones in the past with all of that. If you move back actually for a while, you have that Mithras Gate Chronicle too, which was basically in that facility, which was some old Second Empire Jove thing, which itself obviously was some sort of lead into some coming Triglavian stuff. You had a clone fabricator with tripled outputs, and it needed a quantum entangled 4 helium engine to fuel it. If they wanted to play things through it in that way, you could have, Triglavian clones basically as a burner clone where, hey, put in some Plex and now you have this burner character or something like that. Or they could do the same thing with Drifters if they wanted to build it in another direction. I've been thinking about writing a post about this for a while, actually, in case, just want to write it out. But they could totally go that direction. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Speaking of directions that they could go, one of my favorite theories of yours is that CCP is setting up us to receive the World Arc as a piece of technology that we can use. Do you still feel that way?
I mean, I really hope so. So basically, they didn't make the Angel Capital ships because their whole thing was, okay, so few people are going to see these anyhow, because that's how faction capitals are right now. And, it's just not a priority. Then they have the Zordas, the World Arc. It's enormous art investment, wicked cool thing. And the whole concept of it, honestly, my hope for that is that it would end up becoming some sort of playable thing. If I had to guess what you could do it as, you could have, so think of something between an Astrahus and Fortizar that can navigate on its own and can have its own little gate open up, and it's not going to be some 500 billion-isk ship. It's just going to be more or less a structure that can move around and do its own thing and not have crazy super weapons, but can carry around all these people and ships and whatever, and can set itself up, maybe anchor to get a timer, if it wants to actually set up in a place, and actually just navigate. And if I could see something like that happening and not being prohibitively dumb expensive, having World Arcs become a thing for smaller groups to stage out of mobily, I think that'd be super duper cool. and then you have like the Thucker with their world ships also. Like there is a precedent set where that could be easily something they build into.
And before anybody thinks that this is like bonkers and super powerful, I mean, imagine basically what it would be effectively is a new kind of bridging device like a Titan. But unlike a Titan, these actually have to commit onto the field in order to bridge things in, right? It can jump in, and then other people, your allies can use the gate to also come in through the gateway of the Zordosh. The other thing I really like
is you could also like dock in it and store stuff in it, and I would assume it had very limited asset safety, if any at all.
Right. But the other piece I like about it is, that you point out in your post, is that the Zordosh itself doesn't have any combat defenses insofar as like direct weapon systems. So this would be something that is mostly defenseless, and its primary function would be deployment of the status effect pylons to help influence the fight and create terrain locally on the field, but not be some Doomsday wielding giant force of the battlefield itself.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a feasible sounding thing. None of us can have any idea of whether or not CCP will go for it, but I'd enjoy that.
I think I might be out of tinfoil.
Yeah, we've gone through a lot.
We have. It's an hour and 40 minutes on the recording. So, are there any final things that you guys want to really cover about the Triglavians now that we're reaching the end of things? After hearing all of this, I'm so excited to see what CCP has planned. I'm not sure if it's going to measure up to your very wild and tinfoily imaginations, but I hope it does.
Well, we say it out loud. I say it out loud over and over again, so that way, if CCP hasn't come up with it, maybe they'll hear it and be like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." They've still got time. But so I want to talk about at Eve Vegas, right? We talked to CCP Paradox and a few others about these kinds of things. There was 2 points that that was brought to our attention that I kind of want to release to the audience, because these are my current dead ends. During the discussion, during one of the roundtables, Exxon Fang asked CCP if, with us being able to side with the Triglavians, will we have an opportunity to basically select a clade that we want to be part of? And Paradox's response was very interesting to me, which was simply to say, have you not figured out what the clades represent? And we all kind of took a step back and we're like, wait, that's a weird kind of pushback. And he said, you should probably go watch that We Are Zoria Triglav video again. There's some Easter eggs in there. There's some hints in there that I don't think you've picked up on. And then later on that night, when we got him a little bit liquored up, I asked him for a little bit more information, and he said, you should read Flatland. So there's definitely, and this goes back to kind of like what Hilmar's been talking about a lot and other stuff, where the idea of like multiple dimensions. The new skin that's coming out for London kind of speaks about worlds coming together. You've got Aether Wars, which is also happening in the Abyss, by the way. The Guristas are now canonically going into the Abyss to harvest Isogen 10, which is what the Aether Wars tests are. And they've even suggested that like they might eventually bridge different games, including Eve Echoes, through some intermediary bypass. So the question is there something even deeper about these Triglavians than we've even like comprehended? Are they some sort of guardian of the bridge between parallel dimensions? And yeah, so I'll just leave that one there and ask anybody if you have any ideas for or against that. Please bring it to my attention.
All right, well, it has been absolutely wonderful having you two. How can people in the audience find out some more of your thoughts and or pay attention to what you create if they're interested in hearing more about your thoughts on the Triglavians as the weeks progress?
Honestly, I would so there's this Roleplay as Primary Discord, which is a fantastic place, and if you have any questions about any types of lore, it's absolutely a great place to start, because there's always just a bunch of us on there and people are always willing to talk. In terms of just finding big lore dumps and stuff, if you go onto the forums under the fiction portal and the Eve lore discussion, I've put in a number of different posts about the Jove, the Triglavians, the Drifters, even more stuff, all sorts of stuff. So there are a lot of resources to just take peeks at. And some things in Eve's lore can be hard to find because there's been so much of it over so many years. But if you find people to help, they definitely will. And if we want to get a invite to that Roleplayers primary Discord, that might be great too, because if anyone's interested in any of this stuff, it's a good place to talk.
Ashterothi?
Yep. I stream pretty much every weekday on twitch.tv/Ashterothi. I have my YouTube channel, which has not a clean URL, so I guess you can go to the Twitch thing and I have it linked at the bottom. But also, I tweet a lot. I'm on TweetFleet on Twitter, and that's where I post all kinds of information, whether it's ongoing news about tracking things like Rasnaborgs and emerging conduits and whatnot. As people bring things to my attention, I post it out there, as well as things that are found on HoboLeaks, Singularity, etc. And obviously my stream information and stuff. So I recommend following me on Twitter if you want to know all that kind of stuff.
Alright, well, we will see you again with another lore piece at some point in the future. But until then, take care of yourselves and fly smart. But before we go, I have to give a special thanks to our Crassuses, Pinche Infidel from Old School, Brood from Triumvirate, and Zolka Lando, as well as to our other $5 patrons in Dustin Prater, Meeks, Zar, Olav Oldent, Kem, Raphael, Big Bada Boom, Dunk Dinkle, and the Ashfell Foundation. If you want to support the channel yourself, you can either check out the Patreon link in the description below, or just share this video with someone who you think might enjoy it, as advertisement is just as big of a boon to me and my channel. Until next time, have a good day and fly smart.